and welcome to our deep dive today. We're taking a closer look at the case of Laken Riley.
A 22-year-old nursing student.
Right, from Augusta University, who, well, tragically, her life was cut short back in February of this year.
Yeah, a really tough one.
Absolutely. And our main source material for this, it's just this text file. It's called simply lakenriley.txt. And it's pretty heavy stuff, to be honest. But I think, going through it, unpacking some of the details,
Hmm.
it might help us kind of make a little more sense of things. Have you ever thought about just like how routines that we all have, things that we do that feel totally safe, how those can just become dangerous all of a sudden because of, just stuff completely outside of our control?
Yeah, it is a very chilling thought for sure. And Laken's story really drives that home. It can happen.
So, okay, let's start off. Can you kind of paint a picture of Laken for us? Like, what kind of person was she?
Sure. Um, from what I've gathered, Laken was really dedicated to her nursing studies, and she was also into living, a healthy and active lifestyle. So she would go for jogs a lot to kind of balance out her busy life, kind of de-stress and stay in shape.
So, knowing she was a nursing student, does that give us any insight into her personality? Because nurses deal with a lot. How does this inform our kind of view of Laken?
That's a great question. I mean, nursing is a really demanding field. It really requires compassion and resilience. You have to have a strong sense of responsibility.
Mhm.
So Laken's choice of profession, it might suggest that she was a very caring person, somebody who really took her well-being seriously, both physically and mentally. And, going for those jogs, they're not just about physical fitness, right?
Right.
They provide a space for reflection and for clearing your head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so heartbreaking to think that the routine that was supposed to help her deal with stress, that's ultimately what led to such a tragic ending. It really just highlights how random this whole case is.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And, it's important to remember that behind all these headlines and the legal stuff, we're really talking about a real person,
Hmm.
someone with their own dreams and aspirations whose life was cut way too short.
Absolutely. So let's talk about what happened on February 22nd, 2024, the day she disappeared. Can you kind of walk us through, like, the timeline of events?
Sure. So that Thursday morning, Laken went for her jog, her usual jog near the University of Georgia campus in Athens. Now, it's important to remember that she wasn't actually a student there.
Right.
She just chose that area for her runs.
So she chose to jog near UGA despite not being a student. What could that tell us about, her possible sense of safety or maybe her familiarity with the area?
That's a really interesting detail, isn't it? It kind of suggests that she may have felt some sense of comfort and security in that environment. Maybe she had some friends there or just frequented the area for some other reasons. Um, it kind of speaks to the fact that even in places where we think we're safe, the unexpected can still happen.
Yeah, it's a very sobering reminder that we can't always predict or control the circumstances around us. So what happened next? When did people start to realize that something was wrong?
Well, as the morning went on, Laken didn't come back home. And a close friend of hers um, got concerned and filed a missing persons report. That's really when the whole community came together.
That's amazing how people come together in times of crisis. Can you tell us a little bit more about those search efforts?
Yeah, so the sources that we have describe a really massive search. I mean, there were friends, family, law enforcement. There were tons of volunteers. Everyone just really wanting to find Laken.
And I'm sure the anxiety was just building as the hours went by.
Absolutely.
And we all know, unfortunately, the search ended in tragedy. So can you talk about the discovery of her body?
Yeah, later that day, Laken's body was found. They found her in a secluded area on the UGA campus. Authorities confirmed that her death was due to blunt force trauma. And what's really disturbing here is that the evidence suggests that she was physically prevented from actually asking for help during the attack.
So knowing that detail, I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, it's that really adds a whole other chilling layer to this case, doesn't
Right.
it? It suggests a level of brutality and control that's just really unsettling. It really makes you think, how do we reconcile our need for personal safety with, also wanting to enjoy those public spaces? I mean, how do you do both without living in constant fear?
Yeah, That's a question I think we all struggle with, especially when we see things like this. And as the investigation went on, even more unsettling details started to surface. The arrest of Jose Antonio Ibarra, a 26-year-old man, with no known connection to Laken. This really it brought up more questions than answers. Can you talk about his arrest and what it meant for the case?
Sure. So, Ibarra was arrested really quickly. He was not a student. He had no apparent ties to Laken at all. And he did live in the area, but authorities believe that he acted alone. And all of this just added this extra layer of complexity to this already heartbreaking investigation.
So the randomness, the lack of connection between the victim and the perpetrator, I mean, that had to be terrifying for the community.
Absolutely, it really was. It really highlighted that sense of vulnerability that anyone can feel. If there's no clear motive or connection, it really just fuels this fear that these sorts of awful events can happen to anyone at any time, anywhere.
And it really challenges our sense of security. Makes us question how to even prevent these things from happening.
Yeah. And as the investigation continued, some really disturbing details came out of the court documents. Uh, for example, it was revealed that Ibarra allegedly used an object during the attack. And this detail, coupled with the fact that he allegedly moved Laken's body after the attack, to a more concealed location, it just painted a really, really disturbing picture.
Moving the body, concealing it. I mean, what do you think? What kind of psychological implications could those actions have? What could it tell us about the perpetrator?
That's where things get really interesting, I think. These actions, they suggest that there's something more going on here than just a simple act of violence. Concealing the body, that could be an attempt to delay discovery, of course, but it might also indicate a deeper psychological issue, like
Yeah.
maybe a need for control even after the attack was committed.
It's a chilling thought for sure. And the charges against him, they're extremely serious. I mean, murder, kidnapping, assault. This isn't just a simple assault case.
No, not at all. The charges really reflect just how serious this crime was.
Mhm.
And they point to premeditation. It goes beyond just a random act of violence. It suggests, a really calculated and disturbing series of events. And it really raises the question, what would drive somebody to do something this horrific? Was it just a purely impulsive act, or are there deeper issues at play here?
Yeah.
These are the questions that I think investigators and the justice system really have to grapple with.
And as you can imagine, as the case unfolded, it really captured the attention of both local and national media. There was this huge public outcry, a demand for justice for Laken,
Of course.
understandably so. But there's another layer to the story, one that kind of makes things even more complicated. The source reveals that Ibarra, he was a Venezuelan national
Right.
who had entered the U.S. unlawfully back in 2022. So given those details, how do you think this revelation, how did it impact public perception? How did it affect the discussions around this tragedy?
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer of complexity to an already really difficult situation. It ignited all these debates about immigration policies and border security. And while those are important discussions to have, there's a risk that those discussions might overshadow the real tragedy here,
Yeah.
which is the loss of this young woman who had such a bright future ahead of her.
Right. It's a tough balance to strike,
Yeah.
to acknowledge these broader issues, these societal issues, while also keeping the focus on the human cost, right,
Absolutely.
of this tragedy. So while the legal process is still ongoing and these larger conversations are still happening, it's really important that we remember Laken. How is her memory being honored?
Well, Laken's family and friends, they've talked about what a kind heart she had, and that she had such a bright future ahead of her.
Mm-hmm.
And in her memory, they actually established a memorial fund to support healthcare education and community development,
Mm-hmm.
causes that Laken was really passionate about.
That's amazing.
It's a really beautiful way to honor her legacy, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, that really speaks volumes about her character and just the impact that she had on those around her. It's a real testament to, the enduring power of the human spirit. Like even when faced with immense tragedy, there's still that drive to create something positive, something that really reflects the person that we lost.
Yeah, and it's a powerful reminder that even when we feel like overwhelmed by the darkness of these events, there's always a flicker of hope there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This drive to make the world better in honor of those we've lost. Laken's story, it's tragic, of course, but it also shows just how unpredictable violence can be. It's a stark reminder that it can happen anywhere, to anyone, and often when we least expect it. How do you feel like this case has changed your perspective on personal safety?
It's a good question. I guess it's made me more, just more aware of my surroundings, but I think I'm also more appreciative of just being able to go for a run or something without fear.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that was a freedom that Laken tragically, she was denied that.
Yeah.
And it really makes me wonder, how do we balance our desire to live freely, to enjoy these public spaces with the need to stay vigilant and protect ourselves? It just feels like this constant tension.
Yeah, I think that's a question that we all struggle with.
Mm.
It's complicated. There's no easy answers. We don't want to live in fear, always looking over our shoulders. But we can't afford to be naive to the fact that these dangers exist out there.
It's all about finding that balance, right?
Right,
It's like
exactly.
being aware without letting fear, just dictate our lives. And one thing that really stood out to me about this case was the incredible response from the community.
Right, yeah.
People coming together to search for Laken, rallying around her family and friends. I mean, it's just a testament to the power of community, especially in times like this, in times of crisis.
Absolutely. It shows just how resilient the human spirit can be. I
Yeah.
mean, even in the face of tragedy, we have this innate desire to connect, to support one another,
Right.
to find strength in our shared grief and a shared commitment to justice. It reminds us that we're not alone in these situations. There are people who care,
Mhm.
people who want to help,
Yeah.
and who are willing to stand together and demand justice and create, a safer environment for everybody.
It's easy to get caught up in the details of an investigation, the legal proceedings, all the debates that come up inevitably, in a case like this.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we can't forget the human element.
Yeah,
This is about a young life that was cut way too short, a family that's been shattered by grief,
Mm.
and an entire community that's trying to cope with the aftermath of this senseless violence.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's so important to remember that. And we need to approach this case with sensitivity,
Hmm.
acknowledging the pain and the loss. But at the same time, trying to understand, the complexities that led to this tragedy.
Mm.
It's not about just pointing fingers or trying to find easy answers. It's
Mhm.
about learning and growing and working together
Yeah.
to create a world where these things are less likely to happen.
So as we're kind of wrapping up this deep dive into this case, what are some of the key takeaways that we can apply to our own lives, to our
Mhm.
communities? What have we learned from Laken's story?
I think one of the most important things to take away from all this is awareness,
Mhm.
not just being aware of our surroundings, but also paying attention to the people around us. If something feels off, if somebody seems like they're in distress,
Right.
don't be afraid to reach out, to offer help, or even contact the authorities if you think it's necessary.
Yeah, that's such a crucial point. I mean, we often talk about stranger danger, but in Laken's case, the person who attacked her, he was a stranger to her, and I think that really reinforces the fact that we have to be vigilant, at all times, not just when we feel like there's a direct threat. So what other lessons can we take from this?
Well, another important takeaway is the power of community.
Mhm.
We saw how everyone came together to support Laken's family, her friends, how they supported each other, during the search, during their grief, and even now as the legal proceedings continue. That sense of community, of shared responsibility and support, that's crucial, especially in times of crisis.
Right, and it's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's strength in unity, coming together, supporting each other, working towards a common goal. What else? What else stands out to you?
Finally, I think Laken's story really shows the importance of resilience. Despite the immense pain and the loss, her loved ones have chosen to honor her by focusing on the positive things, her passions,
Mm.
her desire to really make a difference in the world.
Yeah.
That spirit of resilience, of finding hope and purpose, even in the darkest of times. I think that's something we can all learn from.
Absolutely. You've touched on some really important points here. Awareness, community, resilience. These are the tools we need to navigate a world where sadly these kinds of things can happen. And as we've been talking about Laken's case, it just struck me that we often hear about stories like this in the news, but we rarely really dig into like the deeper implications, like the ripple effects that go way beyond the victims and their families.
It's true. We tend to focus on the sensational parts of the story, like who did it, what happened, when, where,
Mm.
but the why that often gets left unanswered.
Right, yeah.
And the long-term effects on people, on communities, those are rarely explored in depth. And that's why I think, a deep dive like this is so valuable. It allows us to go beyond just the headlines and
Mhm.
engage with the human side of it all
Yeah.
and to consider the bigger questions that these events raise.
It's like we're trying to put the pieces together, understand not just the pieces themselves, but the bigger picture that they make.
Exactly. And I think it's about trying to get a deeper understanding, right? Not just of this one incident, but the societal and systemic factors that contribute to these kinds of things. It's about asking ourselves what we can do, you know,
Mhm.
both individually and as a community, to create a world where everyone can feel safe and supported.
Yeah.
It's about moving beyond, fear and judgment and trying to move towards understanding and action.
Yeah, and speaking of moving beyond fear, as we're wrapping up here, I'm left with this question. How do we balance like our personal safety with that desire to enjoy public spaces? It just feels like this constant push and pull, wanting to live freely and also being aware of those potential dangers. What are your thoughts?
That's a question that weighs on us all, and there are no easy answers. It's about finding a balance
Yeah.
between staying vigilant, but also having that freedom. It's about, taking personal responsibility, but also having community support and creating a culture where we look out for each other, where we speak up when something seems wrong, and we all work together to create safer environments for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful message to end on. Laken's story is a tragedy. It's a stark reminder that life is fragile, that violence can be random, but it's also a call to action. We all have a role to play in creating a world where these kinds of things are less likely to happen. What would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from all of this?
If I had to pick one thing, just remember Lakin. And not just for the tragedy,
Right.
but for who she was. A young woman with her own dreams, her own passions. She wanted to make a difference. Let's honor her memory by choosing hope over fear, action over apathy, and working together to build that future
Yeah.
where everyone can live freely and safely and and pursue their dreams without that fear.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for joining us for this tough but really important deep dive. We hope that it's given you something to think about, maybe even spark some conversations about how we can all create a safer and more compassionate world. Until next time, everyone, take care of yourselves and each other.
If you enjoyed this video and want to dive deeper into more cases like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like the video if you found the story compelling, and share it with your friends and family who might be interested in true crime and mysteries. By subscribing, you'll stay up to date with all our latest content and join a growing community of curious minds exploring the most fascinating cases. Click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything.